Danger behind a smile.
This is not one of those angel shot stories you hear about, but something pretty close happened to me last week. I had to meet up with my ex-wife. She was abusive when we were together, but we needed to talk about our kids. I am a man, and I made sure to suggest a public place, hoping it would keep things calm. She did not like the idea, but finally agreed to meet me at a Chili's restaurant. The whole time we were there, she was acting cold and nasty. She kept her voice low, but her words were full of anger and threats. I was not in tears or anything like that, but I was definitely scared. She made sure I knew she was still capable of hurting me, even without raising her voice. At one point, I noticed the waiter standing behind her. He looked right at me and silently asked, "Are you okay?" I gave him a small shake of my head, just enough to let him know that, no, I was not. When we finished eating and were getting ready to leave, the restaurant manager came over with that same waiter. The manager calmly stepped between me and my ex-wife and told her, as politely as he could, that she needed to go ahead and leave on her own. He said she was starting to act aggressive and that the police had already been contacted. She had to leave right away. After she was gone, they quietly asked me to stay at my table. They brought me a drink on the house and waited there with me until the police showed up. When the officers arrived, they made sure she was nowhere nearby, then walked me out to my car and even followed me home to make sure I got there safely. It might not have been an official angel shot situation, but those restaurant workers were absolute angels in my book. They saw something was wrong and stepped in when I needed help the most. I will never forget what they did for me.
Craziest shift I ever had. This is not exactly an angel shot story, but it is in the same ballpark. Back when I was working as a line cook, I had a shift where something downright crazy happened. I had stepped into the hallway to check how busy the kitchen was when I noticed this awkward, kind-looking guy leave the bar in a hurry. He was heading toward the restroom, and he looked like he had tears in his eyes. I figured something was wrong, so I followed him and asked if he was all right. That is when he told me what was going on. Apparently the woman he was out with had been texting her actual boyfriend, who he did not even know existed, and a bunch of the guy's friends. They were planning to show up and beat him up, all because he refused to pay for all 10 of her cranberry vodka drinks. He had seen the messages she was sending while she was kind of passing out at the table. She was clearly way too drunk, and honestly, the bartender never should have kept serving her like that. I went straight to the manager and told him everything. We held off on charging the guy's bill, helped him sneak out the back door, and had him hide inside the restaurant owner's pickup truck. He was too buzzed to drive himself, and ordering a rideshare would have taken too long, especially if those guys really showed up ready to fight. Sure enough, just a few minutes later, a beat-up, dark red Honda Civic from the mid-1990s came flying into the parking lot, tires screeching. That had to be the guy. I signaled my manager, and we walked outside, pretending to chat like nothing was going on. The angry dude stormed into the restaurant, grabbed the drunk girl, and started to leave. He asked if we had seen her date. We said he was in the restroom throwing up, and that we had already called him a ride. Everyone working there had seen the guy slip out the back earlier, so they played along. As the angry boyfriend started yelling in the parking lot, he began throwing rocks at the girl's car. That is when the restaurant owner came outside holding an old pool stick. He did not waste time. He swung it hard and cracked the guy on the wrist. They peeled out of the lot and took off. Later on, we ended up calling the nerdy guy a rideshare and even covered the cost of her drinks. When the police showed up later, they were not too happy that we let him leave without filing a report. They asked for camera footage, but we only had indoor security cameras, so there was not much to show. I never did find out what happened after that night. Not long after, I left that job for a better one. But that shift, that was hands down the wildest day I ever had working in a restaurant. The question that set off the alarm. Just a heads up before I start, "Where is Angela?" is a safety phrase they use in the United Kingdom. It is meant to help people get out of uncomfortable or unsafe dates. I did not know that at the time, though. One evening, I was working behind the bar when this guy walked up and asked me, "Do you know where Angela is?" I did not catch what he said the first time, so I leaned in and asked him to repeat himself. He looked a little panicked, eyes wide open, and said it again. "Do you know where Angela is?" Now, we had just hired a new girl named Angela. She had started working back in the kitchen a few days earlier, so naturally I figured maybe he was her boyfriend or a friend of hers or something. Trying to be helpful, I pointed toward the kitchen and told him she was back there. As soon as he looked in that direction, he said, "Thanks," and then took off, straight through the nearest fire exit. He hit the door so fast that it set off the building's alarm. A few seconds later, the manager came running over trying to figure out what the noise was. I explained everything that had just happened, still kind of confused myself. That is when he told me the truth. "Where is Angela?" was actually a code phrase the police had just introduced in our area. It was meant for people to discreetly ask for help if they were feeling unsafe on a date or in a bad situation. Problem was, no one had told the staff about it yet. He knew when to leave. Yeah, this really happened. And yeah, it was every bit as uncomfortable as it sounds, mostly because the woman involved was a long-time friend of mine. He was a quiet, mild-mannered guy in his mid-30s. Worked as a software engineer, kind of reserved, polite, not the type to cause a scene. She was someone I had known since high school. She had just gotten out of a rough relationship, a messy, open thing that really did a number on her. She told me she wanted to start fresh, meet someone decent, and try to get her life back on track. At the time, I was working at this little wine bar out in the suburbs. It was not some crazy nightlife spot, mostly older folks and couples coming in for a quiet evening. Not exactly where you would expect drama. I was working that night and not watching too closely, but from what I was told, the whole thing went downhill fast. Apparently, within just a few minutes of sitting down, she started hitting him with some pretty wild conversation topics. The first 4 things out of her mouth. 1, she went off about how much she hated her ex. 2, she said she was into rough sex. 3, she ranted about how much she disliked religion. And 4, she told him his style was boring. Then she started going on about how she trained in Krav Maga and said no man would ever get the better of her again. It was like she was trying to prove something. At some point, the guy quietly excused himself and walked up to the bar. He leaned in and asked me for a specific drink that we had been trained to recognize as a safety request. I got the message loud and clear. I called him a rideshare right then and there. The car pulled up within 2 minutes and he slipped out without a word. When I told her he had left, she absolutely lost it. She started screaming, flipped over a table, and even threw a couple of chairs across the room. It got so bad that someone called the police. When they showed up and tried to calm her down, she kept fighting them, and they ended up having to use a stun gun to get her under control. She was arrested on the spot. Later, we found out what happened. She had recently started taking Wellbutrin along with a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and the combination caused a rare reaction. It can lead to violent outbursts in some people. In the end, she was not charged. She apologized for everything, covered the damage she caused, and even sent that poor guy a heartfelt note saying she was sorry. They never went on another date, obviously, but in the long run I do not think I misjudged her character. She had a rough patch, that is all. And I have to hand it to that guy. He knew how to read the room and get out of a bad situation fast.